Hello and welcome to the big story here on the BDTV Breakfast Show. This is where we get to discuss key issues shaping our nation and our economy at large. My name is Elizabeth Musa. Today we're discussing the challenges facing Bureau de Change operators following the CBN recapitalization deadline. And with Central Bank of Nigeria's recapitalization deadline for BDCs operations having expired on June 3rd, 2025, and many operators still struggling to meet the new capital requirement, it will seem that the end of the road has come for many of the BDC operators if the CBN does not extend deadline for the second time. Now, the new recapitalization thresholds require Tier 1 BDCs to have a minimum share capital of 2 billion naira, while the Tier 2 BDCs must have a minimum share capital of 500 million naira. Now, these figures represent a significant increase from the previous uniform requirement of 35 million naira for all. With the deadline gone, what options are open to the BDCs and how best can their operations be strengthened and sanitized to better serve Nigerians, especially those in the informal sector? Well, to discuss this conversation and so much more, we have Comrade Olusoji Oluwole, the president of the Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance and Other Financial Institutions, which is called ASSBIFI, and he's our guest this morning and he'll be having this conversation with us today. Thank you for joining the show, Comrade.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Elizabeth, and good morning to all our viewers.
Good morning to you, sir. Let me start by asking you, how will you assess the operations of BDCs in Nigeria, and how do you think their recapitalization is necessary? Do you think their recapitalization is necessary?
Well, in terms of their operations, I think it's something that is quite necessary. BDCs tend to create some level of backup to banks, particularly in situations where banks are not readily available to provide the services that the BDCs will provide. So, for example, you have an emergency travel over a weekend, a public holiday, or after banking hours. The BDCs are there to provide that kind of support, provided, of course, that they have the fund available to provide that kind of service. Now, back to the issue of recapitalization. Well, the CBN has come out to say that the reason for the recapitalization is to bring sanity to the system, to provide a stronger structure in that sector of the economy. While they've given those reasons, partly in terms of sanitizing, in terms of sanitizing the sector, I tend to agree with them a bit, not completely, in the sense that if you recall, I think it was sometime last year or thereabout, that about 4,000 or so licenses were revoked. And I believe that they are doing this to reduce the number of BDCs that are operational in the country, and thereby bringing in the issue of recapitalization. If that is the reason, well, probably they may be right. But the question stands that what does the capitalization actually stand for in the way they operate their business? Because in reality, it's more of a cash and carry system. They must have some kind of cash backing to be able to carry out their transactions. So in terms of being necessary for sanity in the system, probably. But in terms of the workings of the business, probably not.
Now, what are some of these challenges that the BDC operators face in meeting new capital requirement, and how best do you think that this can be addressed to ensure that at least there's a lot more compliance?
Well, of course, when you move a system, when you move the capital requirement from, I think it was 35 million naira up to 500 million and 2 billion naira respectively. That is quite a steep movement, especially an environment where they do not go to the capital market. So they have to raise it from their own investors. And when you go to the CBN regulation relating to BDC operations, you find that they are also strict about the people who can actually invest in the system itself. we'll find that the challenges that they will face will be basically around raising their fund. And in being able to overcome that challenge, I think that the BDCs ought to have come together to look at the challenge, not as individual challenge to each of the BDCs, but as a challenge to their own space in its entirety.
Now, comrade, let's talk about mergers, acquisitions, and all of that, and how they can help operators to meet this capitalization threshold. Do you actually think that just only a few BDCs can meet Forex demand by Nigerians?
Well, even with what we have, with the number that we have and banks, I'm not sure that they are particularly meeting the demands as it were. Because at least I go around and I hear a lot of people complaining that they are unable to get the desired volume of FX that they require for their businesses, for their personal transactions, health, education, and all the rest of it. But when we talk of mergers and acquisitions, it does not reduce the number of operators that you find. What it just does is that when it doesn't reduce the number of outlets that you have, what it does is reduce the number of operators that we have, and thereby creating a bigger environment. You will recall, let's look at the banking sector, for instance. You will recall that the merger under Governor Soludo at that time reduced the number of banks from over 100 to just over 20 at that time. But it did not reduce the presence of banks within the environment. What it just did was to create a stronger banking sector. And I believe that it is the same thing that is being considered for BDC operators.
And I like that you've mentioned Governor Soludo's time, but let's talk about some of the illicit activities that we see within this bureau, the change sector. Now, what measures can the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, what measures can they implement to enhance that there's a lot more transparency within this sector?
Well, I believe that the number one thing they ought to do is to totally eliminate the presence of cash within the operations. Today, I think one of the rules is that for BDCs to sell FX to their customers, at least 75% of this must be cashless. So basically, it should be in a card or in an account. And by the time they start implementing that, particularly in the terms of exchange, it creates some form of tracking for the regulator and for the security agencies to ensure that the right people are actually getting the effects. The second, of course, is to create a robust process of accountability. In other words, whatever it is that you sell, whatever it is that you buy, must be well documented for anybody to track and to be able to investigate where those things, where questions may be raised. And I think this is where technology really comes into play, that the CBN, in conjunction with the BDC operators, should be able to build a central monitoring system where all records of activities are put into that system. It reports to all the necessary desks that exist today in terms of monitoring for them to be able to check the activities and nip any unwholesome activity in the board.
Thank you for mentioning the central monitoring system. I was going to ask you about how we can leverage technology, but you already did answer that for me. So let's talk about how we can regulate more compliance, especially within the informal economy, because we know that, let's say it's the informal economy that really patronizes, no, not precisely just the informal economy. I mean, both the formal and the informal economy, but let's talk about the informal economy and how the BDC sector can regulate more compliance to be able to serve this informal economy effectively.
Well, today, for you to have access to FX officially, either through banks or through the BDCs, the CBN has already created a site where you must put in your application for whatever it is, whether it's BTA, PTA, whether it is for health or for whatever reason. You need to go in there to put in your application and to to submit all the required documents for that purchase. And when you put it in there, you get a response from CBN, and then it is passed to the organization that you are dealing with. I'm not too sure whether BDCs have been uploaded on that system, but I know that banks are already on that system today. And once it is approved, the same information goes in there, and then it can be monitored from there. I'll use the PTA as an example. You must put in the data page of your passport, your visa, your ticket. And I think somebody also monitors to check that you actually went on that trip to get the PTA that you requested for. And where you do not embark on that travel within a specified period of time, it is expected that that money must be returned to the institution that you bought it from. If that kind of thing is implemented and enforced within that space, then it will actually reduce the amount of sharp practices that are being reported today. We may not be able to eliminate everything completely at this point in time, but at least it brings some level of control and reduction in those activities.
And when we talk about all of these activities, we need to also talk about how stakeholder engagement must be encouraged, especially between the Central Bank of Nigeria and the BDC operators. So how can we make sure, like from your own point of view, how can we make sure that there is a lot more stakeholder engagement and continuous dialogue between the CBN and the BDC operators?
Well, in the document that the CBN produced on the regulation of BDC activities, provision has been made for all this. And I think one of the things that I found very interesting in that document was that the CBN has also encouraged the BDCs to come together as one party. So it's not a case of every BDC compulsorily raising 500 million or raising 2 billion. It spoke about franchising. So what it simply means is that all the BDCs together could actually come in as one body to be registered by the CBN. And then the individuals who have come together as that one body become franchisees in the various locations. That itself is an engagement that they could do. And you know, when they do that kind of thing, it actually reduces the cost of operations for them, because it simply means that as one body, they are dealing with one system, and everybody who is connected as a franchisee simply connects to that system. And that way, it actually provides a robust and a better monitoring system, because everybody is seeing the same thing, everybody is in the same system, and it's easy to quickly pick out anyone who is not doing what they are supposed to do.
And it's always important for us to borrow experiences from other countries. So what lessons can we learn from other countries when we're talking about BDC regulation and how to approach sanitizing this sector?
Well, you know, well, just like you said, it varies from country to country. So you go to some countries today, and these BDC activities are being carried out in post offices, not even in banks or BDCs. And we also know that there are some organizations that are known all over the world who carry out these activities. So you get to airports and you will find them there. You're able to exchange your money. You're able to withdraw. You're able to do quite a number of things in those locations. In some cases, in some countries, you'll find these activities in supermarkets or in stores because they have been licensed to do that. But I'm not sure that our environment is prepared for that presently. Maybe in the future, yes. But I think the best thing for us is to make do with what we have and then begin to look at how we can develop it further to create those presences. Now, recall that I spoke about the franchising system earlier on. Perhaps if we had that kind of system operating today, then those franchises would operate from locations that I mentioned that happen in other parts of the world. Of course, you know, because of the kind of environment that we operate in, several things have to be put into consideration in terms of security, because you are dealing with money, in terms of the infrastructure, all the things that are going to be required. Those locations must be able to provide those things as well, which I believe are things that have also been stated in the regulation that is made available. So once they're able to meet all those things, I believe that we'll be able to operate just like is operational in other countries today.
Right, just before I let you go, comrade, are there any support mechanisms, be it financial, technical, assistance, whatsoever, that can be provided to smaller BDCs to aid in their compliance with these new regulations?
Yeah, well, this is something that actually has to be initiated by their own association. Today, when you look at the number of BDCs that we have operational, you'll find out that some of them, I'm sorry to use the word, when we talk in terms of the various sizes of the BDCs, some may not be more than the size of a corner store. So you'll probably find out that in the entirety of that particular business, maybe they just have about 4 or 5 staff, including the owner. And there are some that have a vast number of staff that are working there. But as an association, the support should start from there. When they start, they'll be able to go to the regulator to request for some further support, which I'm sure that the regulator will be too happy to provide, considering the value that it will bring into the operations of the BDC business as a whole. And then, of course, some of them may be able to work with banks and other financial institutions for some kind of support that provides some kind of synergy in terms of the financial activities, for example, transferring the funds, receiving the funds, the card business itself and all that. There are a lot of parties that I'm sure will be willing to provide that kind of support, but the initiation has to start from them because they know what it is that they require.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Oluwole, for this insightful conversation on BDCs and recapitalization. It was truly very remarkable. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
This has been The Big Story on the BDTV Breakfast Show. My name is Elizabeth Musa. Keep watching BDTV.